You want to find those things that you are really good at and you go deep into them. And it's in that specialty, in that depth, that you actually can gain far more opportunity for work.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Anna Clements, and this is Audiobooks with Anna, where we explore the fascinating world of audiobooks with industry experts. Today we have the absolute joy of being joined by Sean Pratt, who's going to come and talk to us today about our photographs and how they work. We talk a lot here in Clubhouse about transferring words into images, and I talk more about the translation of words from the page to the ear. The reason we like authors to get their books edited is because the way a book is laid out on the page allows us to translate that visual into sound. The way paragraphs are broken up, the lengths of sentences, all of those things go into what we narrate. But what we're here to talk about today with Sean Pratt is Picture Your Voice. From words to images, making your marketing come alive. Sean, welcome to the sofa. Thank you very much for joining us here on Narrators Assemble. How are you?
On the back end of a very, very bad 2 weeks of having a wicked head cold that knocked me for a loop. But I'm on the back end of it now, back in the studio, recording a very interesting book about World War II for Simon & Schuster. So back to the coal mines.
I'm glad to hear you're on the mend and glad to hear you're back to recording. So there's lots of people in the audience today who know you, and I'm aware there are lots of people in the audience today who were here 3 years ago, almost to the day, when you last came in to talk to us about this very topic, but lots of new people too. So give us a quick overview, if you wouldn't mind, of you, of your story, what you bring to the industry, if you can, in under an hour, and see if we can get on with this conversation and see if we can have a chat about this idea of how we use pictures.
I was born in a humble log cabin. No. Um, yeah, so let's see. Grew up in Oklahoma City, started acting in the theater at school and with the local theater groups when I was around 10. Did that all through high school. Went off to Santa Fe to get my acting degree and did some movies out there before I went to New York to be a classical theater actor from the age of 20 through 40. But it was in my around 35, I relocated down to, actually 30-ish, in my early 30s. I relocated to Washington, D.C., sort of start my life and career over again. And when I moved down there was when I got into audiobooks. I had met an actor who introduced me to another narrator named Grover Gardner, who's a real icon in our industry. And he sort of mentored me through getting started. And I started back when the industry was just at the launching pad of exploding, back when we narrated on tape, as it were. But there were very, very few home-based studio narrators at the time. And so I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And after I did my first couple of books, I was hooked. And even though soon after got out of theater, got into film and television, which was only sporadic because working on the East Coast there, you'd work a day or two on a TV show or a movie that was in town. My main focus switched over to audiobooks, and I kept at it. This is now into the early 2000s. And by this time, I'm married and we have kids and a mortgage. So I was narrating full time. I was narrating 50 books a year, doing basically one, and by this time transitioning into nonfiction. I'd started out in fiction. And so by the time I really got serious about working full time, I would say the ratio was 90% nonfiction to 10% fiction. But I was doing, like I said, basically a book a week. And just having that volume of material, sort of like a deep dive, a master's course in what it meant to be a narrator. Of course, we didn't have anything like we have now with Facebook groups or social media. It was not even in its infancy at that time. We had, I think there was a thing called meetup.com or something, and that was the closest thing you could have to a group chat. So everything that I learned, I brought from my experience of being a working actor in the theater and film and the marketing ideas that came along with that. In fact, and so during the time I got into audiobooks, just as a narrator, I was getting into teaching and coaching actors on the business of show business. And so that led to me working up and down the East Coast, um, doing classes at colleges, universities, actor groups, where I would come and do I do a session on agents or filing your taxes or headshots and resumes and marketing and what that actually meant. And there was an exercise I'll get to a little bit later when we get a little further into the discussion tonight that spawned an idea that I've used now as a narration coach. Um, but I really didn't get into the full bore one-on-one coaching until about 10 years ago, I'm guessing. I had been doing some audiobook workshops, sort of along the lines of what Johnny Heller does, where he'll come to a place and put on a weekend or one long day workshop, and he and I now do those together. But I did a few of those in the Baltimore, Washington, Richmond area. But mainly about 10 years ago, I wanted to do one-on-one coaching and teach through nonfiction, since no one was doing it as a sort of a discipline, as it were, or coaching it, and to add in a business track. And it was the business track that I was more focused on than anything else, because having been in show business, as it were, for so long, I've seen a lot of really wonderful people who've left the industry because they couldn't or they wouldn't master the business side of show business. And one of the core elements of any business, and show business especially, is understanding what it is the thing you are actually marketing. Marketing is about understanding the widget, as it were, the product or service, and then positioning it to the right marketplace where the buyers are. And in the act of telling them that you have this thing, that's called advertising. But if you don't go back several steps and understand what is the core thing you're actually selling, if you do not understand that, you're going to send out a mixed message or a bad message that will end up hamstringing your efforts at getting work as a freelancer. So, one of the things I've really worked hard on with my students is this notion of creating promotional materials. Some of them obviously are photographs, but there are other materials as well, and they all come from the root idea of what it is they're actually selling, which is their voice.
So we get a little, and by we I mean I, get a little afraid by words like networking and marketing. And I am aware that breaking it down makes me feel more comfortable, and the audience seems to like that too. So rather than calling it marketing, which sounds like a very generic umbrella, talk to us very specifically about practical things we can do that actually will further this idea of marketing.
Okay, so yeah, let's take it out of the context for a second about being a narrator. Let's say we have a restaurant, because a restaurant, if you want to open one, can be a very individual expression of what kind of food, what kind of place do you want people to come to. I've known several restaurateurs in my life, and in fact, I narrate a restaurant coach's books. And if you think of if you had a restaurant, it's like inviting people to your house for a party every night. So what kind of place do you want to put out to the world? So in the act of deciding, do you want Italian, Chinese, Mexican, whatever, you've now created a market that you said, this is my unique thing. This is the talent. This is the unique thing I have to offer. Okay. But you have to identify it first. Then you have to find channels to advertise about that to the public, to say, hey, come to my place to have this experience. So it really starts in the beginning when we talk about marketing. Once again, we have to understand what is the thing you're selling. You are selling your voice at its core. Just as not every actor will fit every role that we see on television. And I'm sure we've all had experiences where we see an actor cast in a movie or TV show, we go, they were miscast, right? They don't fit the world of that story. The same goes with your voice. Now, I think the hallmark of a mature performer in whatever line of show business they're in is understanding there's the work that they love to do and the work they get hired to do. And sometimes there's daylight between those two loves. And a mature performer knows where those exist and accepts that. I may want to be when I was in theater, I may have wanted to be the sexy, dangerous leading man, but I always played the light comedic juvenile or the funny leading comedic man because that was the essence of what I had to give in when it came to casting for those kinds of roles. I was not being seen in those other ways just because of the essence of what I had to offer. And the same thing really goes for our voice. Yes, we can disguise our voice with accents and character voices and things like that. And there are people in our community who are very, very good at character voices. But since I exist mainly in the world of nonfiction, we're looking for your voice. I tell my students, your voice is much more interesting to listen to than you putting on a voice that you're, quote, narrating to me. And even within the world of fiction, when we put on different character voices, there are just some voices that fit certain genres better. One of my favorite examples is my friend Johnny Heller. If you've never heard Johnny speak, I strongly recommend, and I'm sure most of you have, but I'll say it anyway, go to Audible when we're done and look up Johnny Heller and listen to a couple of his noir murder mysteries. And when you do, if you've never heard him speak, you're going to come away from that experience going, my God, that guy sounds like he stepped out of a Humphrey Bogart movie, and he just fits it perfectly. And then one day you're going to hear Johnny speak in person and the penny's going to drop and you're going to realize that's really the way Johnny speaks. He was basically raised in Chicago. He lives in New York. He's this, 60 some odd year old unstoppable force of nature. But with that accent and that rapid fire delivery, his voice is perfectly suited to the noir murder mystery genre. Whereas my voice, not so much. I'll give you another great example, and I think he's here in the audience, is J. Rodney Turner. J. Rodney Turner has this wonderful Southern/Western kind of voice, and it's this big, rumbly baritone bass sound. Well, that's never going to go away for Rodney. That's the core of the thing he markets. He knows that's the core of what makes him successful. So he's not going to try to work outside of his core uh, specialty, as it were. He's going to lean into it. So what kind, and so when you go to Jay Rodney's website, which I strongly recommend all of you do, listen to his voice, and then you can read his marketing, how he pitches himself, how he positions himself for a possible author, book publisher, or audio producer. So the beginning of this whole process comes from self-awareness. I say that a beginner, or even if you've been doing this for a while, if you're still casting about where do you fit, this is why listening to as many different genres and narrators as possible is so important. Because once you begin to hear your colleagues out there and the genres that they work in, hopefully you're also going to start hearing your voice as well, right? You go, oh, I see. This guy, if he sounds like he's from Chicago and he talks a mile a minute, oh, that's like a Johnny Heller voice. Well, where does Johnny Heller work? Oh, he sounds this big rumbly guy. He sounds like he's from Georgia. Where does that guy? Oh, he's like J. Rodney Turner. I say, what are those? What kind of style of material do they get cast in? So this is at the core. Starts with self-awareness. So the exercise that I have my students do is based on an actor exercise I learned when I was teaching actors how to move their own career forward. And it basically is based off, if you want to see the long version, I'll give you the short version here. But if you were to go to YouTube in the Audiophile Magazine channel and look my name up along with Michelle Cobb, I did a webinar called Marketing for them. And I suggest that you watch the whole thing. It's a much deeper dive than I can do here. But at its core, we can describe your voice along three broad categories: the personality of your voice, the energy, and then the attitude. So, using myself as the example, this is a lesson I teach my students. When I tell them about the personality of my voice, because I'm not one of these ridiculous, toxically masculine, wannabe alpha male whatevers, I'm not one of these defensive or aggressive sounding men. And so I say that the personality of my voice is very generous. It feels welcoming. You feel safe when I talk to you. So I say the personality of my voice is generous. When it comes to the energy of my voice, because, head cold aside here, when I'm narrating, I use a lot of melody in my voice. I narrate at a pretty good clip. I'm well over 9,100 words per finished hour. So I say that and there's a certain, as I say, I narrate in a major key as opposed to a minor key in my voice. I say that my energy rather, is upbeat. And then when it comes to the attitude of my voice, I liken it, because I've been a parent now for 35 years and as well as a teacher for that long, that I have an inspirational voice, that there's a sense when you listen to me like, hey, if I can do it, you can do it. Come on, let's just do it together. Let's go. So when I describe that to people, my voice, I say it's generous, upbeat, and inspirational. Now that I didn't come up with those words on my own. I did what I suggest that's in the YouTube videos. I reached out to a lot of my colleagues, people I've worked with, both in the VO industry and in the acting industry. And I even sent along audio samples to listen to. And I said, can you come up with an adjective for each of those three categories: personality, energy, attitude, an adjective that you think best describes my voice? And I got, I don't know, 40, 50 different responses. And I boiled them down until I got, by audience vote, and then a little tweaking around the edges, those three words. Because the truth of the matter is, guys, it's very, very hard for us to step away from our own work and evaluate it objectively. I may, in my heart of hearts, wish I had some sexy, manly man voice, but I don't. I don't have that kind of voice. And I have to be realistic about that. So once I began to see this is how these words identified my voice, that became the moment of self-awareness about what? About the product I was going to be trying to market, the widget I was going to try to sell. It's so what do I do as far as casting goes with that? I tend to do, in the nonfiction category, books that are very upbeat. They're generous in the author's tone about the topic, and they're very inspirational. So I do a lot of self-help, a lot of how-to. If it's a book, I did a book of with its say contemporary culture. They tend to be books that, in the end, have a hopeful message. They're not the kinds of books like, those self-help books for men, like get your ass off the couch and quit being a loser. It's not That's not my voice. Yeah, I could do that. I mean, I just did it there and make, sort of an attempt at it. But trust me, there are plenty of other men out there who have that kind of sound or essence, and they can reach it much more easily than I can and maintain it. So this, once again, is about self-awareness, describing your voice. Now, for those of you who have been working for a while, maybe you've started to see a pattern in the kinds of work you're getting. Okay, that's also a clue. And then along with those three words, though, I push my students to try to come up with a phrase. Because those three words, generous, upbeat, and inspirational, could describe a 25-year-old young woman or a 75-year-old man. To me, a phrase, if it's done correctly, can not only add context to those words, it can also point the person who comes across them. It can it can give a clue to say, this is how you should be casting me. Okay. Once again, I'll go back to Jay Rodney for a moment. Jay Rodney has one of the best catch lines I've ever heard for his voice. And that is, I forgot the three words he uses, but his catch line is, like your favorite pair of cowboy boots. Is that right, Jay Rodney? I think that's right.
You'll get a delayed answer in the chat, hopefully.
But suddenly, when you hear that phrase and you hit the play button, suddenly, in my mind, if there could be a pair of cowboy boots in a cartoon, that come to life, like in Toy Story or something, they would sound like Jay Rodney. Okay. And that is a perfect example of how a phrase can point us to, there we go, rugged, reliable, and relaxing, like your favorite pair of cowboy boots. And that's exactly what his voice sounds like. So here, when Jay Rodney was my student, we did this exercise and he got feedback. We worked on those three words. He came up with that phrase, which I thought was just absolutely brilliant. And so now what have we done? We've identified the thing that makes Rodney's voice unique. And then he can then, through advertising, meaning pushing it out there, he can then inform that message. Now, just as a side note, I've changed my assignment with my students. I used to make them put their three words and phrase on their marketing. Now I leave it up to them, because I've discovered that, as hard as I might push, some of my students are very uncomfortable with marketing in general. And I've realized you can't push rope. You have to believe in those three words and the phrase and understand that they are helping you in your marketing, but you have to get, to a certain comfort level with that. Okay.
I was just going to say that I can imagine that you have to believe in the words to be able to sell them. But I'm curious, for those of us who don't have the perfect voice, like Jay Rodney, how do you transfer those thoughts into words and ultimately into pictures, which is where we were? I
Right.
apologize if I've jumped the gun, but
Yeah, no. So ultimately, we do describe what we do. Now you could maybe, perhaps it's about delivery of the message. Perhaps instead of blazing three words in a phrase across your landing page of your website, you have it more strategically placed inside your biography, perhaps on your bio page. Okay, but it can be placed other places in, if you want to actually put it in text. But where this gets into our discussion today is that those three words and that phrase, when I work with my students, once we complete that assignment, after that I say, now we know where we're going to be looking for our demos. Because when I tell them is that in the world of fiction, that their hero or heroine of the demo that they're going to pick, whether mystery, romance, whatever, that it needs that person, this is a general rule, okay, that the hero or heroine needs to be those three things. So if I was doing some fiction demos, I would want to make sure that my hero is generous, upbeat, and inspirational. So he could be the good guy detective, or he could be the do-gooder cowboy who saves the day, or he could be the man who finds loves again after all these years of being lonely, but he's got a heart of gold or whatever. And in the nonfiction category, that the tone the author takes with the topic in my case, should be generous, upbeat, and inspirational in the way they deal with the topic. So once again, self-awareness leads to a marketing decision, which is what is the content of the demo? Okay. Then let's translate it back over to finally pictures. Because ultimately, you can what I challenge my students with is what do your words and phrases look like? So I'll use myself again as the example. So my catchphrase is making nonfiction cool again. Okay. I can't claim total credit for that. I worked with Andrea Ems, who was my web designer and former student on my website, and we spitballed dozens of phrases and finally settled on that one as the best, most concise thing that I wanted. The idea being that for most people, when they listen to nonfiction, they think of it as very dry and academic, whereas I think of nonfiction as a dynamic reading, like a one-person show. Hence, I'm making it cool again. That it's lost something, and then I'm bringing it back. That was the marketing idea. So we have those three words and that phrase. So how do you translate that into pictures? So what did I do? I went on to Google image search, and I started typing in words like the word generous, and then upbeat and inspirational. I looked up the word cool, right? Men, cool. I looked up words like, or phrases, men reading, men in libraries, men reading in libraries, and so on. And I began to develop sort of a catalog of images that I go, oh, I liked that image. I liked the fact that that guy is sitting there, you know, um, sitting on top of a bookshelf reading a really interesting book, or that he's outside of a library but he's reading to kids, or this guy looks really put together, in his wardrobe, and that's the kind of image I want. So I began to develop a series of images that I felt very quickly I could communicate to my photographer. This is the image I'm going for. This is what I'm trying to do and say through the images to reinforce these words. I'll give another example here. He's no longer narrating, but years ago I had a student. He was based in Sao Paulo, of all things. He was an American down there, and he sounded like an American Jason Statham. So I think we all know who Jason Statham is, the British action hero. He sounded just like him as an American. And the work he was getting were mainly in romance and military action books and things like that, like James Bond-esque or Jason Bourne-esque kinds of books. And so we were working through these images through this part of the lesson, and forgive me, but I forgot what his three words in his phrase ultimately settled on. But it was close enough to what we were after that I told him, I said, okay, now let's talk about making pictures for your website. I said, we both know that I think his words were like rugged, dangerous, and sexy or something like that, because that's what he sounded like. And the phrase was something along the line of, I bring cufflinks or handcuffs depending on the moment, or something along those lines. And I said to him, okay, for this photo shoot, you need to be the sexiest mother in the world. Sorry. I said, you have to portray sex and danger in your pictures because that's the kind of work your voice is going to get you. If we had a picture of him all smiley in a t-shirt inside his booth with the headphones on, that tells me absolutely nothing about this product, this voice, which is why it's one of my personal pet peeves. I always strongly push my students, do not have those kinds of pictures on your website. That's no different than if I was, once again, in a restaurant and I have pictures of people working in this, just working in the kitchen. Okay, that's the kitchen. That's what they do. They make food, as opposed to pictures of the things they create that are unique for that restaurant, you see. So I told him, all right, buddy, find yourself a couple of really sharp suits. See if you can find, beg, borrow, steal, or rent a sports car. And if you have someone, his wife, and I said, get her dolled up and put her in the passenger seat and do a photo shoot as if you're the next James Bond. And that's exactly what he did. And the pictures were absolutely amazing. Of course, I'm still kicking myself that at the time I didn't understand how to do screenshots. But he basically looked like if Jason Bourne met Jason Statham and James Bond and other action heroes on a photo shoot for a movie. He had a yellow sports car, the beautiful woman in the passenger seat. He looked all dead sexy with the stubble and everything. And his career started to really take off. Now, the reason he quit were some personal family reasons, but he was on the right track. He had come up with an image that matched his voice specifically. Now, he had a very unique voice, so it made the whole process much easier. And I can already hear or probably think that many of you out there are going, well, I don't know what my voice does. I don't know what it is. Am I right there?
I would imagine so.
Yeah. So
So can I ask then? So this whole idea. Sorry, I'm just gonna call the half hour and invite anybody from the audience to come up and say hello and chat with us about all of this. This idea of the fact that people judge a book by its cover, and that we're looking to basically a visual representation of our voices is what you're talking about. So how does one? I'm still at a slight loss for how you would even begin to go around, assuming you've done the exercise, you've got this idea of three words that, well, I do a lot of work with people with regards to elevator pitch,
mm,
which ultimately is about self-awareness. It's about understanding where you fit within the industry, where the industry will allow you, for want of a better word, to perform, and therefore where you ought to be focusing your attention. So it's got to be a good idea to have that self-awareness and to get a visual representation of your voice on social media. But Sana has beautifully said, what if you look very different to how you sound? And it's curious about kind of the idea. What I was looking for was the idea of how do you, and I'm hoping you're going to bring up. Lillian was here a minute ago with the Union Jack dress, and I'm curious about creating the idea of the three words, not necessarily using your body or your face, but kind of the emotional feeling behind the photographs. Talk to us about that, about sort of setting up a stylist or I remember you mentioned not using a headshot photographer, one of the examples of how to
right.
go about finding this
Yeah.
concept.
Whether you're heavy or thin, that's not the issue. This is not about suddenly becoming a model. Okay. I just want to be very clear about that. And then also there was a comment earlier about, what happens if you don't look the way you sound.
Yes.
As a fallback, okay, so I'm using the clearest examples to get started with the general construct, okay? But there are plenty of narrators out there who may not look the way they sound, or they may not have a particular genre that they inhabit. And in that case, what I try to say is that you need to look like the best version of yourself, whatever that might be. So, right, for grooming, clothes, and makeup and styling, but then also that you can also suggest your marketing core by the setting of the photograph. So, for Lillian's a great example. She's wearing the Union Jack. That coat is amazing, absolutely amazing. Okay, so she's already told us that she's British just in that one photograph. Or frankly, it could be something as simple as the fact that you could have a person who's in a British call box, right? So you may not necessarily look the way you sound, but you can give us clues as to how your voice will sound before I hit the demo page. Okay, so setting of the photographs are important. So what I personally feel is a commercial photographer is a better choice because they're used to working on the fly out in the environs, as it were. A headshot photographer is used to working in their studio under controlled places. Okay,
I love the idea of the commercial photographer being able to set up an entire scene. So it isn't just about your face or your body, it's about the story you're telling, the
Right,
version of your surroundings that allow people to understand the things you like, the places you feel comfortable,
right.
the impression you give.
Exactly. And so if there was a student of mine I'm named Sarah, and Sarah had this wonderful raspy kind of lovely alto, and she had there was a certain savviness and streetwise sound to her delivery. Okay. And so when she did and she just said that there was a certain air when she would narrate for me, there was a certain kind of feel like there was an inner toughness to her delivery and to her personality that came across in the read. Strength is what I mean by that. So when she did her shots for her website, she was in let's say a dark blouse with a black leather jacket, great jeans and boots, and she was in this particular bookstore that has a bar. I want to say it's in Kansas City, and there she is reading a book with an old fashioned on the desk place next to her. And there's sort of a like an and she had this lovely long gray hair, and there was a whole feel like she's the strong woman that you want to narrate that kind of nonfiction piece for self-help for women who like want to take charge with their lives perhaps. Or she could play the detective, the toughest nails woman detective who's on the case. And all that said in that image, and then when you hit and if she's done her job right, when you hit the demo button, the demos what? Demonstrate those qualities through the performance. Okay. So, but I also want to circle back to so the commercial photographer is used to setting a scene, and I tell plenty of my students who go, well, I don't really know, I don't have, my voice isn't unique enough, like say Jay Rodney's voice, or my former student who was like the Jason Statham voice. And I said, that's perfectly fine. I don't have I don't feel like I have a truly unique voice. I just know what to use it for. So what do? I put myself in clothes and in locations that reinforce sort of a spirit, a joie of what I can offer in my read. When I did the photo shoot, we did it at this wonderful old library at the campus of Oklahoma University in Norman. And I went out with a stylist and we bought some really nice clothes. I didn't spend a fortune. Went to Thank You Men's Warehouse. And I knew exactly how I wanted my hair to look and the clothing for everything. And we boiled down the shots before I did any of that. I scouted it out. I looked at it. I said, this is what I want here, here, and here. Now, going back to those people who maybe you don't have a definitive look or feel, once again, you want to look the best version of yourself possible. That's always a given. So when it comes time to doing pictures, if now I understand everybody has a budget, and I do tell some students who are on very tight money, I said, look, if worse comes to worse, you do your research, you look in your wardrobe, and you have a friend with an iPhone who can take some pictures of you to get started. You always start where you start. My very first headshot as a young actor, I'm in a jean jacket with the collar pulled up in front of a brick wall. How cliche can you be? But I was 18 years old. Okay. That's all I could afford. And then over time, I got better shots with better photographers and I knew more about myself. So don't wait. You're not going to get the perfect shot for the perfect website. But if you do the back work, finding out how to describe your voice, perhaps where you're being cast, and then doing images of those. If you have a friend who knows how to work an iPhone, and you take a little time, maybe you can find something that will approximate and be good enough to get started. The worst thing you can do though is to come up with these words on your own without any kind of interaction with people, and then grab a friend and just start shooting stuff in whatever you happen to be wearing that day. I had a student who I was saying, look, you're doing a lot of, YA material, young children material. You're really, I'll call him Bob. I said, Bob, you're perfect for this, but you need some pictures, maybe where you're reading to. And he said, well, I have my two sons. I said, great, well, you could read to them. Maybe you're out in a park somewhere. Maybe you're around a little campfire. And so Bob did the shoot very quickly with his wife, but it looked like he had finished mowing the lawn before he did the photo shoot. And I said, you got the right idea, but you're not dressed. You don't come across as professional. You don't come across as the essence of your voice. So that's why you're looking for Google image searches when you're looking for words and settings is important. Pay attention to how those people are dressed. What are they handling? Are they in a chair? Do they have books with them? Are they standing? Had a student who had a nice manly man kind of voice. So his photo shoot was around a campfire with his dog. And what is he doing? He's reading Iron John, which was a really popular book about, what, 20, 30 years ago. And he's got sort of like manly man books. And then the fiction pieces they had a stack of books next to him on this log. And they were also, if they were fiction, they were sort of rugged tales of men doing manly things. That was his voice. Another one, she doesn't use it anymore, but when Jennifer Jill Araya was my student, we did the same exercise. And originally she had her 3 words and phrase on her website. She's decided to take them down in the meantime. That's fine. But those 3 words in that phrase affected her photo shoot. And if you go to Jennifer Jill Araya's website and you look at the images, you're going to see this wonderful, uplifting, colorful, positive person, right? And that tends to be the material she narrates. So she has taken her voice, she has now put it into a physical form and gone out with a photographer and found pictures that reinforce that. And so if you know nothing about her and someone recommends you to her, or maybe you listen to a book of hers and you're an author or a publisher and you go to that site, those images have a psychological effect on you. They go, wow, she'd be perfect for this uplifting YA series, as opposed to, I don't think she's going to be right because this is a very heavy, dark, angry book about XYZ. Now, could Jennifer conceivably narrate that book? Well, of course, she's very talented. But once again, you want to find a narrator or a voice or an actor who fits that much better and much more easily. That's where we're going with that.
Let me allow you to mute your mic a second and take a sip, Sean, and comment that I was curious about, and some of us in the crowd, and some of us haven't, but some of us have done public domain books. And one of the things I love about public domain books is the requirement to understand the whole process from the point of view of the producers. So you're looking at covers for your public domain book, which leads you down a whole path, or led me down a whole path of the fact that different covers for different genres are very different. Horrors and thrillers tend to have red and black covers. Non-fiction books tend to be bold and single colored. There's a whole, if you're interested, reach out to me because I have a whole list of places to go to discover the different genres and the different requirements of covers for books. And this feels very much like that people are basically judging us as books by our covers, which we know happens in the world and is unfortunate, but that is how it works. You mentioned that people should do their research, they should become aware, they should investigate their own voice and their message, which Shanna pointed out isn't always what we look like. Covers are fascinating. Basically, that's the conversation we're having today. So I'm just curious, Sean, that having done this awareness and kind of found out their 3 words and discovered what genres their voice should sit in and where other voices within the industry which are similar to their voices belong, do you feel that there are genre-specific photos, like with book covers, whereby people who sit by campfires might read cozy mysteries, whereas people with sports cars might read thrillers? Do you think that's an important idea?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a reason why, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year in marketing research. There's a reason why, like you just mentioned, certain colors resonate in certain ways with us psychologically. So those are used on book covers. The same thing goes for, I mean, I did a lot of commercial modeling in my 20s and 30s. And, the wardrobe colors that they would choose for me, yes, they matched my coloring, but they also matched the coloring for the target demographic. Okay. And so yes, colors mean something. The images, it's this is where, and once again, this is where YouTube is such a wonderful source. There's tons of videos on these topics about, literally type in, how do you dress for a photo shoot, or how do I dress for a certain look? We do this all the time if you were going for corporate jobs, how to dress for that interview, how to come across in a certain way. It's the same thing for us. Now, for those of you who, there was a woman earlier in the chat who said that she does a certain thing in nonfiction, but she also reads like fantasy and a number of other genres in fiction, and they can be all, that sounds a bit over the shop. And so that just, what that tells me is this woman's got a lot of talent in her voice, and that it can spread genres. That's fine. So then my advice to, I'm trying to find her here, Judith, would be, go with, you need to look as best, the best version of yourself as possible. And there's ways to dress that are, you could say, that are neutral, right? They don't necessarily point in one definitive direction, but you can also subtly, once again, in the photo shoot, maybe the landing page has a neutral shot of Judith that feels more like a head and shoulders or three, half body shot. But as we work our way through her website, onto her press page, onto her demos page, onto her reviews page, they're subtle clues as to the kinds of things that she does. So maybe one page, let's say she does lots of horror stuff. Maybe she has one page where she's by, a fire in an overstuffed chair with a snifter of brandy, and there's, these gothic horror tales. But the next one might be fantasy, so we could suggest it by her being out in the woods somewhere, with dappled light. There's You can suggest genre just by location. And still, once again, maybe she looks neutral in the way she's dressed, but the location suggests the kinds of genres we should think about. Those are all marketing tricks that they've used for literally 100 years. The there's when you see like the medical ads for couples who are retired, what are they? They're always walking on the beach. They're always wearing beach attire. It's a nice sunset, and the location says successful retired people who are trying to enjoy their later years. They have a medical issue. Our drug can fix it. That's what all those images say. So if we have her, Judith, in the dark, library for one shot, and there's some horror novels or some suspense novels next to it, that says, okay, she narrates that material. And then her job will be to find a really good demo that demonstrates those qualities in the demo itself, that she can pull off a really engaging read in a horror book or something like that.
So do you think that the first port of call, excuse me, would be to focus in and hone in on, and I noticed that in Judith's comment, it was, should this be done once a year? But I'm under the impression that actually discovering your core and understanding what you're offering the market is the beginning and the end of the process. It's almost the without that information, you're hoping for the best. Is this a thing you should be repeating?
I think the word is refining, because unlike our bodies, which age, so if I were still working in front of the camera or theater, I would have a whole different set of pictures done every so often, every couple of years, because visually I'm changing. I'm getting older. One of the wonderful things about being a voice actor is that, by and large, unless you do something to your voice consistently, like smoke, or you're screaming and yelling all the time, or doing damage to your instrument, your voice is pretty much settled now until you get to the far end of your lifespan. I mean, that's when people's voices begin to crack and have a lighter tone because they are getting older, and that's a choice too. That's a marketing change. But I think once your voice settles, it's pretty much set. Now it's about you, through experience, through the reciprocating action of what books you get hired for, starts to refine how your marketing should be seen. And then also you might find that you get lucky. You hit a certain vein with your work. Maybe, so say with like the Steve Corona, who does his great character voices. So maybe that, over time that refines he starts to become much more, I do lots of fantasy and sci-fi, so that will now influence the look and feel. But that just takes time. So as far as how often you should do it, that's hard to say, because the actual core, the core thing you're selling, once you can identify it, is not going to change that much. I mean, I'm going to be 60 years old this year, but I'd be willing to say that I don't really sound like I'm 60. So, I don't know if I do need
Wait,
to do,
what?
yeah. Hang on a minute. Um, I do need to redo my website pictures because they are younger than I am, if you know what I mean. And I've been planning on doing that hopefully this year. But that's more about me being a coach and just for publicity purposes. If I were a narrator, I would still redo them because I'm getting a little older now. But because I know what it is I sell in the nonfiction category, I would still be along the same theme of that. What Sean Pratt, quote unquote, brings to the work is making it, cool again, making it welcoming, exciting, and engaging. So it's hard to say. I think it's more about a refining than it is going back to the drawing board every time.
That's very cool. We've got 8 or 9 minutes left of the hour, so I'm going to invite anybody and everybody to raise their hand and come up and say hello. I feel like we've done a mastermind overview. There's been lots of lovely comments in the chat about lots of things to think about, certainly. Talk to us a second about the business section of your course, because you mentioned right at the beginning that in your course you do focus on sort of business and the promotional materials. Is
Yes.
this kind of part and parcel of that?
Yeah, so it's at the core of it actually. Everything else springs from there. Now, I make my students as they will whine in private chats. I make them build some promotional materials that they never would touch unless I force them to, like their narration resume, the narration review sheet, certain kinds of promotional materials they might need for live events, like business cards, promotional cards. Let me think. What kind of demos to put forward, and beyond also things like filing their taxes or joining the union, all to me part and parcel of being smart in business. And then we get to social media, and once again, once we get into what the concept of advertising is to tell people you have a product to sell, and that's done through advertising. In this case, through promotional materials. That would be your website, the pictures on there, your demos, your presence on social media. And then that should also affect perhaps the way you come across on social media, which is a slightly different conversation. So, if let's pretend I had the Jason Statham kind of voice and that was my deal. Well, then I would be damn sure that all my social media postings that promote my work have a certain feel that, okay, this guy does sexy romance and dangerous Jason Bourne stuff. It wouldn't be me necessarily doing goofy things in the kitchen, or falling down on ice or whatever, if that's not, if I wanted to maintain the brand that I have for my work. Now, some people, they want an overall brand that says, hey, I'm just a regular person. This is what I do. And if they feel comfortable with that and it's getting them work, then fine, it's working. There's a colleague of ours, Gary Furlong, who's this wonderful Irish narrator who does a million different voices. And he's just, when you meet him in person, he's so quiet and almost shy. But you get him behind a microphone, and the man's like Robin Williams. And so his social media marketing reflects his antics, his vigor, his excitement about getting behind the mic and performing. And that goes with the marketing and his brand that he's established. So, but yes, go back to my work. The narration portion is about learning performance through nonfiction material that my students have told me, like 80% of what I teach them through nonfiction, they use in their fiction work anyway. But to me, the core of the whole program is understanding the value and importance of identifying what it is you have to sell and how we can get it out to them, to the possible buyers, authors, book publishers, and producers that are out there, by sending the correct message, a focused message that will get their attention, and then have them come back and say, well, I looked on your website, Steve, and you're running around in a a forest green shirt and everything, and you have a whole lot of fantasy stuff. I'm assuming you do really good fantasy, and I listened to your demos, and you do. I've got this fantasy series I'd like for you to audition for. That's sort of how it all coheres into one. Steve understanding that this is how he comes across in his performance. He lets that influence the images on his website, the demos that people hear, his social media presence, and that becomes his thing. You know, we say in business that it's not necessarily a good thing to try to be an every man, every person, every man, every woman. You want to find those things that you are really good at and you go deep into them. And it's in that specialty, in that depth, that you actually can gain far more opportunity for work. Now, it's not just one. So, like for Steve can do a lot of different things, right? So like for Judith, who does those different genres, to go deep into each one of those is going to get her work, as opposed to, well, I can do everything. No, you can't. You specialize in certain things, and that's a journey that just takes time. As you reciprocate those back and forth, the work you get, the feedback, the reviews you get, the testimonials, or the feedback from the author or publisher, that will start to guide you. And then finally, go look at your colleagues. How are they putting themselves out there? You may get some really great inspiration by seeing someone who does a totally different genre from you, but the way they present themselves in their promotional materials sparks an idea. Okay, but for instance, the landing page of my website was sparked by an image I saw on Google search. I just said, "Men reading in libraries, having fun." And a photograph of this guy sitting on top of this really tall bookcase with his legs flopping over the edge reading a book was the inspiration for me laying across that countertop. And no, it's not CGI. We actually really did that shot in that library. But so look around to be inspired by these people. Find a commercial photographer or a brand photographer. But like I said, don't let money stand in your way. If you do your research, if you know what it is you're selling, with a little, with a little pluck and looking through your wardrobe, and a friend who has a pretty good eye with an iPhone, you can get started with your promotional materials right away. Don't let perfect get in the way of good enough right now.
Well, Sean, I need to congratulate you. I don't think the room has ever been so silent. I don't think we've ever had nobody come up and say hello. So, congratulations. They're obviously either scribbling furiously because they haven't left. So, anything I didn't ask or that you'd like to throw in at the end just before we wrap up? I think Gregory says, too scared.
I'm going to be, if you heard this, please come up and introduce yourself. I'm happy to chat with you. I'll also be going out with Joel Frumkin on audiobooks at sea. That will be in April. In early March, although I will not be going to APAC itself, I will be going to Johnny Heller's Naughties and schmoozing with anybody who's there, if you'd like to meet me in person. And also, at this point, Johnny, Joel Frumkin, Paul Rubin, and I'm not sure who else, are going down to Florida in May to do a workshop there. So that's sort of what's on the horizon for me work-wise. I have yet to put it up on my all of this up on my website because I've been ill the last several weeks, but I've hoped to catch up with myself soon. So hopefully you can find me there. If you want to find out more about what I do as a coach, you can check out my website. And please send me an email at seanpratt@comcast.net, and I will happily send you some more information.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you. Today we talked to Sean Pratt about the visuals of our voices, and my takeaways. People do judge a book by its cover, and our photos are a visual representation of ourselves. So let's get thinking. Let's get our caps on and get our best foot forward and all that. Thank you very much to everybody. There was a great conversation going on in the chat. So thank you very much to everybody who participated in that. And thank you very much to everybody who listened. We couldn't do this without you. So thank you again. And let's go out and be our favourite selves. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.